talk about the influence of the physical environment on creativity. So, as was already told, my PhD project is on the relationship between bilingualism and creativity, and I adopt a situated embodied cognition perspective. And since this perspective is relatively new, we decided to take a first step by investigating creativity from this perspective. So, according to this perspective, cognitive processes and actions that result from these processes are regarded to be situated-embodied, meaning that they're influenced by environmental factors, but also of people's opinions and perceptions of these environmental factors. So, in this sense, creativity emerges in the interaction of people with their environment. So people act upon affordances, and affordances is a relational construct, meaning that it's where an object meets the characteristics of a person. So for example, a fence affords jumping over it, but not for everybody. For me, only the first fence would afford jumping over it, because then the fence is not too high and I'm not too small and I'm able to jump over it. But for an Olympic athlete, the second fence may also afford jumping over it, because she or he is capable to do so. So affordances are dependent on the physical properties of an object, but also on the abilities, skills and knowledge of the people. So in my research, I define creativity as the emerging skill of an individual to discover complex affordances by making combinations between already existing affordances. So, and this may lead to discovering and applying novel uses of objects, ideas, or solutions. So following this view, the physical environment influences creativity because it affects the affordances that you can perceive. In this sense, creativity can be seen as situated. In my study, we're trying to find support for this statement. The aim of our study is to gain insight in how the physical surroundings of people, in my study children, will influence creativity. So we compared creativity of children in a low stimulus environment with the creativity of children in a high stimulus setting. And we also explored eye movements. Children wore eye-tracking glasses during the creativity task, by which we could measure their gaze. And so we could explore the eye movements in relation to creativity. So we expected that the children in the low stimulus environment would be outperformed on the creativity measures by the high stimulus environment. Because in the high stimulus environment, there is much more to work with. And the high stimulus environment offers more physical properties of objects, which could increase the possibility to discover something new. We also expected that looking at important objects would increase creativity. So the methodology. 71 participants were part of our study. They were all part of grade 5 or grade 6 with a mean age of 11 years old. So we used an adapted version of the visual alternative uses task, and we changed the computer task into a real life task. Furthermore, we administered a subtest of the TEACH, the sky search, in which children needed to find similar spaceships as fast as possible. And we also administered a questionnaire on executive functioning. So we asked children what new, crazy, and unexpected things they could do with an object. And there were 5 trials, each of 2 minutes. In the first group, there was only the target object present in the middle of the table, a cloth hanger in this example. This was called the low stimulus setting, and in the high stimulus setting, the target object was surrounded by 6 other objects. And children were told in the beginning of in the instruction that they could look at it, but they weren't specifically asked to come up with the answers using the objects on the table. So where they were only told to just look at it in the beginning, and then they could decide for themselves whether they want to use it. The verbal responses of the children were coded on fluency, flexibility, and originality. And originality was coded sample-based. So when less than 10% of the children gave the same answer, it was coded as original. The eye-tracking measures were coded using gaze code. We defined 9 areas of interest. The target object was in the middle and is visualized by a question mark because it differed during each trial. The 6 surrounding objects were represented left and right. And we also coded when children looked at the table or at the wall. So no significant differences were found on fluency and originality, meaning that children in the low stimulus and high stimulus setting gave the same amount of answers, and the answers were also even on originality. There were differences on flexibility, and the low stimulus environment outperformed the children on the high stimulus setting, which wasn't what we expected. We expected it to be the other way around. I will come back to an explanation later. So what we also found was that in children with good selective attention skills, the differences between the two groups were smaller than when children had less developed selective attention skills. So an overview of the mean time that the children looked at all the objects. Around half of the time children were looking at the target objects. Around 20% of the time they were looking at the surrounding objects. And the other 30% they were looking at either the table or the wall. So we found that there was a positive correlation between all surrounding objects, meaning that when children looked at one surrounding object more, they were also more inclined to look at another surrounding object. There was no correlation between looking at the surrounding objects and looking at the wall or the table. And there was a negative correlation between the target objects and all the other objects, and also the wall and the table, which kind of makes sense. What we also found was that there was no correlation between looking at the objects and the creativity measures. So looking more at the objects represented on the table didn't influence either fluency, flexibility, or originality. We did find an influence of the environment, so the richness of an environment does influence creativity, but it might be dependent on the object present on the table or in the room. So maybe, or in our study, the presence of the objects were detrimental for the flexibility of the children. But maybe when children are presented with other objects, it might have another influence on creativity. And despite that we didn't tell the children that they needed to use the object, they might thought that it was important to use it because it was available. So they thought, well, okay, it's there, so I might need to use it anyway. So maybe different outcomes will occur when the objects are more blended in the environment, or instead of that they're presented right in front of them on the table. So in some, there seems to be an influence of the environment on creativity, but future research is needed to give insight in the details of this relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlos. Any questions?
Thank you very much. I'm always super excited to see studies done on materiality. I tried my own version with brainstorming teams, and I did get surprising findings like yours. So my conclusion from there, and you pointed at it exactly at the end, is that the way we present and we interact with objects is not as separate entities. They're part of a setting. So I wonder exactly, so my question was basically what you said, but it's a suggestion as well, to present settings rather than objects, and to think about being at the beach or being at school, and create the psychology of objects, because otherwise they might stand out in ways that lead to functional fixedness rather than openness.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think that some children really thought, okay, I need to do something with it because it's presented. I saw some differences in children because afterwards I always ask them, okay, how did you do it? What strategies did you use? And some children said, oh well, I blocked everything and I just focused on the target object because I didn't want to be distracted. And other children said, okay, there were some target objects there, so I used them. And others, well, didn't think about it and just did it. So I think it's definitely the way you set your experiment is very important, and it influences the outcome.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed it. What age were the children?
Around 11.
Because we have a pilot study that we've run with a cross-sectional between 4 to 16, and we noticed, and it's only in pilot at the moment, we presented them with a picture of the object and asked them to imagine the object. So we were looking at that thing. We noticed there was a developmental shift in the way pictures were always better for every single age group, but for younger children, the object led to more fluency, but for older children, the thoughts led to, no, the other way around. For younger children, the thoughts, for older children, the objects did. So it might be worth looking at that, at the response in age, and it was a really, really clear interaction in our results there. So, yeah, that's not really a question, is it? Sorry, but it's just a comment, yeah.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, I do know that a colleague, she also investigates divergent thinking, and she presented pictures to the children, but the setting was in the classroom, and she noticed that children were looking at the picture, but also using the surroundings. So I think that...
And there is some evidence as well from eye-tracking in children with neurodevelopmental disorders that a clustered environment is actually really core for thinking and for concentration for everything.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be a bit provocative now. So it doesn't matter, this is how the thing is. You know, you did this experiment in order to show, you know, in your hypothesis, as you presented them at the beginning of your study, that creativity is situated, and I completely agree with you. The fact is, however, that this, you know, your results did not support your hypothesis. Does that mean that creativity is not situated?
Thank you for your question. I think my results point out that it is situated, but in another way. So I think if I didn't find any results, so that there were no differences between the two environments, that might have suggested that it wasn't situated, but we did find results only the other way around.
Small thing, very small.
Small, yeah, that's true.
Anyway, this is how we do it. You know, we never say, do this, not do. You know, we try to find, you know, that's what we do. We try to justify our hypothesis. But, you know, it's obvious that it's not supported. So it's evidence against it.
Sorry, it was situated in both. There was a first and in both. So, you know, there was materiality in both conditions from what I understand.
No, I completely agree. It is situated, but the thing is, you know, the way it was presented in the beginning, it was like, you know, if we support it, it will be evidence of creativity being situated. Well, it didn't support it, so, you know, this is, you know, about the hypothesis, so you have to change the hypothesis.
It's not a ping pong. Okay.
Yeah. It's not, yeah.
We're involved now.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
No, it's part of the business.
Okay, let's move to the next one.
Thank you.
Speakers, thank you, Marlos. Okay, speaker number 2 is Kim van Broekhoven. She is a PhD candidate at the School of Business and Economics at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. In her dissertation, she aims to improve our understanding of determinants of the evaluation and selection. And she assessed which policies will effectively reduce suboptimal performance in the evaluation and selection. To gain more insight into the determinants of the evaluation and selection, she collected data among 8,000 German university students. To assess the effect of policies, she conducted experiments among primary school children and university students.
Thank you. Is this on? Is everybody hearing me?
think so.
Okay, so everybody is awake. Perfect. Then we can start. So I'm gonna present one of my papers about the effect of task exposure on ID evaluation. And basically, this morning, Todd already introduced it a bit. If this thing, yeah, the other way. So basically, thinking about the innovation process in companies, what Todd already told us this morning, that companies have the tendency to split up this process. So you have a team of generators, they come together in a room like this, you let them go on, be out of their box, come up with ideas, and then afterwards you get a management team. And those are the gatekeepers of the true innovation. Of course, I'm exaggerating here a bit, but to make a point. So basically the managers that are more involved in the evaluating of the ideas that the generators came up with, and also in the end the selection of the ideas. And there's actually little evidence of the effect of dividing or integrating this process more. So that was my main motivation to look more, okay, what if we involve the managers more into the generation process? What does that do with the ID evaluation, with the ratings of ideas? Does it make them more critical or more closer to experts? So, Julia already touched upon this this morning a bit, that from a knowledge perspective, you can argue that the knowledge and experience that somebody has in a task could actually influence your divergent thinking, of course with coming up with ideas, but it could also influence how you rate ideas. So that's more one way to look at it that could actually enable creativity now in terms of, okay, the ID evaluation. But you could also think of, okay, because you were already exposed to a task or you already have generated ideas about this, that you might be more critical towards other ideas because you're thinking about your own ideas. This is also a little bit related to the ownership bias, which also came back today, so it's all well integrated. So the relation between ownership bias and ID evaluation has mainly focused on interpersonal evaluation. So you have generated ideas, then you are asked to evaluate your own ideas. And it could be a certain ownership bias in that, because those are your own ideas. So just to be sure, I'm not looking at intrapersonal evaluation, but purely at interpersonal evaluation. So when participants received ideas from other people and were asked to rate them. So there was a study in 2016 that actually looked at the comparison generators versus managers, which I found really interesting. It was in the context of the circus profession. So there were basically already people in the profession of a generator or people already in the position of a manager, and they were asked to evaluate ideas, and they compared those two groups together to see what's the effect of divergent thinking. However, if you compare these groups, you cannot really disentangle the effect of being involved in divergent thinking or task exposure. Because the generators in this case, were involved in divergent thinking, and the managers weren't. But at the same time, the people involved with the generating process, they also had more task exposure. So they basically already thought about it, and then they were asked to rate ideas, while managers saw the problem for the first time, and they both could have an influence. They also then compared managers versus hybrids, and the hybrids were then people that actually already, those are managers, but also generate ideas. But they describe in the article that these were people already in existing jobs, and therefore you could already have differences at the beginning between managers and generators, because it was not random, but people were already self-selected them, possibly in that position. So the effect of task exposure on ID evaluation is still unknown, and I would like to tackle that one with an experimental study. So I will compare ratings of participants on the ID evaluation, but I will not only compare them, we also have benchmarks of experts to know a little bit where we're going. So basically, how did we do this? We tested this on a student population, because we wanted to collect a lot of data, and that might be really difficult in firms. So we cooperated in a biannual survey, an online survey among German students. That's Fachkraft 2013. We took the data collection in March 2018, then they added the creativity measures, and a little bit more than 7,000 students completed the questionnaires. To give you an overview, the sample is rather broad. So Germany consists of 16 federal states. All states were in there. Also, when you think about the domain, so we're not only engineering students, for example, but you have all domains in there. And then you also have university and University of Applied Science, just to give you a little idea what kind of students were in there. The questionnaire focused on 2 main topics: study and work, and personality, creativity, and cognition. So, how did we do this? For the study design, we had 6 IG generation tasks. Call them here realistic and unrealistic tasks, but as this afternoon we already saw first order or second order problem solving tasks. So basically 2 unrealistic were the alternate uses tasks, and then these 6 IG generation tasks were randomly distributed among the questionnaires. This means that each questionnaire received 2 randomly selected IG generation tasks, so each participant. So this is then the distribution of the tasks. Imagine, you could be the one that first received, the train task. So you were asked to generate ideas for the train problem, how to improve the use of public trains. And then, for example, teaching. So then you were asked how to improve teaching at a university. So after IG generation, they were asked, can you evaluate, can you rate ideas for one of the following problems? So how to improve the use of public trains, or how to protect the environment. For today, I will focus on the train problem, because we have creativity experts ratings for that, and we are now working with the Dutch railway system also to get more content experts about this. So the distribution again, because they were randomly distributed among the questionnaires, this gives us the perfect opportunity to actually create these conditions of, it's random in which group you are. So basically, imagine that your first IG generation task was about the teaching, and then the second was about the task. Then the questionnaire was programmed in such a way that the second task you immediately get also with the ID evaluation. So these are the participants that actually generated ideas for the same task, and then are also asked to rate those ideas. So I already told you that always the second task counts, because it's the most fresh in your mind. With this one, we made an exception, because we assume that if you already have generated ideas for the train or environmental task, that those ideas stick with you and you will still remember the process while you rate the ideas afterwards. Then we also have a group who never saw the problem that they will rate the ideas for, but they did generate ideas for another problem, a realistic one. And then we have one group that actually generated ideas for the alternative uses task as their second task. So, how did we measure the whole ID evaluation? So, we received data of a previous study published in 2017, in which 40 people generated ideas for how to improve the use of public trains. In the end, 72 unique ideas were maintained, and these ideas were rated by 10 creativity experts. Creativity experts, you can think about a creativity professor or an art academy teacher. From the 72 ideas, we selected 39 ideas that varied in creativity, and we made sure that the interrateability between the experts was high enough, so that the experts actually agreed on, how original, how creative, or visual effective do you think this idea is? So, because we couldn't give 39 ideas to each participant, because then they don't want to help us anymore with the survey, we decided to give them 4 ideas from these 39 that were randomly drawn and then given to the participants. And because we like 4, we also gave them 4 criteria to rate the ideas on. So you have originality, creativity, feasibility, and effectiveness. And then here, effectiveness is more defined in, to what extent does this idea really solve the problem? And feasibility is more focused on, to what extent can we actually implement this idea? How easy is it to implement? So that's the difference between those two. So what do we see? we see that there is a significant difference between participants who actually generated ideas for the same task compared to those participants who generated ideas for other realistic task, which means that the participants in the same task are a bit critical, rated the ideas lower on their originality. So those were the participants who were actually involved in the IG generation process. So think, for example, about the managers being involved in the generation process before rating. Then we see a same pattern among creativity. We don't see anything among feasibility and also not among effectiveness. So it seems a bit that if you think about this, the definition of creativity, you know, we have multiple ones, but for example, the standard one that focuses on this originality part and the more the appropriateness part, that something is happening with this more original part. So I already told you that I will also have experts ratings. So the yellow bar is for the content experts. I will not discuss that one here, because it's just to show you that those are differences between the participants and experts. But as you also can see, it's one, because we are still working with Dutch railway system to make sure that we have multiple experts to rate the ideas. But for now, I can focus on the creativity experts, because those were 10 creativity experts. And what we see is that there are differences, again, on the dimension of originality and creativity, that the creativity experts rate the ideas significantly lower. So they're more critical on these dimensions than all experimental conditions. If we look at effectiveness, we don't see nothing, also because that was not asked in that study, so we don't have data about that. They did ask about feasibility though, and we do not see any differences, but we only see a marginal difference when you compare the participants who generated ideas for other realistic tasks compared to the creativity experts. They are slightly lower. So, to wrap it up, for originality and creativity, we saw a pattern that the same task group rated ideas lower than the other realistic task group. We saw that also the creativity experts rated ideas lower than all experimental conditions. And from all these experimental conditions, we see that the same task group rated the ideas the most similar. Doesn't mean exactly the same, because we have seen it's not, but they are lowest or they're most similar to creativity experts. For feasibility and effectiveness, we found no differences between the conditions. For creativity experts, they rated the ideas similar to the experimental conditions. And of all experimental conditions, the same task group and the other non-realistic were most similar to the creativity experts. So thinking about implication for practice, managers might actually benefit to be more involved in the IG generation task, because with manager I refer to the same task group. So when they are more involved in the IG generation for another task, for the same task though, but do not evaluate their own ideas, they come closer to the creativity experts. This is, of course, based on the assumption that creativity experts have the truth. And I would like to show later also in this paper, comparing with the content experts, it will be really interesting to see, do the creativity experts differ from the content experts and the conditions from these experts? Because in the end, it looks like a search for who actually has the truth about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Any questions?
Okay, thank you very much. Two things. One is that in the end, nobody has the truth, in my opinion, because it's always subjective. So, you know, you can always argue, and if you're good at extracting value of an idea where other people don't see any value, maybe you are more creative. And the other thing is managers, when they come in the idea generation process, if it's a teamwork, then there's a possible problem of hierarchy coming in and disrupting a little bit the process. I don't know if you have had any experience on that.
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting question. So I am familiar with the literature about the whole group and brainstorming, and also when you introduce then someone from who might be more dominant in speaking up, or for example hierarchy indeed. So all my research basically involves individual creativity. So I focused on, you did this alone without the context of a team, because the group's dynamics are really interesting, but at the same time really complex. So thinking about that in this research, I would see it more, okay, a manager is still sitting on his beautiful chair in his manager room, but before they actually come together or they're asked to rate the ideas, they first just go by themselves, for example, spend 5 minutes about generating your own ideas for this problem before you actually rate the ideas that you get from the generating or research and development team, to be a little bit more involved in the generation process. Because I totally agree, when you involve them in the group process, then a lot of things can happen. And I did not research that. Yeah.
Thank you. I really like the idea of including content experts and creativity experts, and maybe still they could be more appropriate, maybe the content expert for judging the feasibility of the solution, and maybe creativity experts more for the originality of the solution, so they could have more relevant expertise on different areas. And also just a brief note, so if you look at the ability to evaluate ideas, so one point is to look at the similar average, but then it's also interesting to look whether they co-vary highly with the experts, for example, across ideas, because there are different ways you can get to the similar mean, but of course, if you show high discriminatory power, so this is the other, but I'm not sure you have enough ideas to run this analysis as well. Just a few thoughts. But I really love the idea of getting different expertise in.
Yeah, thank you very much for that comment. Right now I'm working on that indeed, because we simply took the average of the 4 ideas. We did the first analysis, but then I thought, it's random, but still, imagine you have 4 ideas, and the person next to me gets 4 ideas from which 3 are randomly chosen but highly original, purely because you have 3 that might already influence how you evaluate the other ideas compared to the one that gets, for example, only 1 original idea. So now we actually calculated how you can take into account these reference points, which actually did something with the results, but we're also now looking at how we can actually do per idea and if we have enough power. So I would love to talk a little bit more about this maybe later on as well.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you for a very nice talk. I was wondering if you've considered using or looking into the ideas that the evaluators had generated themselves in the first session, and looking at whether there were similarities to the idea that they were then rating. I know that this is a headache to code, but it just seems to be very interesting. Also, in order to examine the possible influence of ownership bias that you talked about initially, if the ideas they had generated themselves were similar or very dissimilar to the ideas they rated, how did that affect the results?
Yeah, thank you very much. Hearing, that's what I also always love about conferences, it gives you a lot of inspiration. So also hearing more the talk about ownership today, that actually gave me the idea, okay, the theoretical mechanism is still a little bit unclear what is going on, but we could actually go back into the data, see whether they have generated similar ideas to figure out whether ownership bias is actually playing a role here. That was an idea that I got today, also now thanks to you. So I did not investigate the practical feasibility of this, but if you think about it, this group is smaller, right? Smaller than the rest. So it might be feasible to look into, or something like an algorithm that can choose the words to see whether those words are in the data. Yeah.
We have time just for the last question.
I suggest that's something that's really worth doing, because I know someone that's working on the alternative uses task in Melbourne, and she's found that if a rater suggests they could have found that idea themselves, they rate the idea lower every single time quite significantly. So if the rater decides they could have thought of it themselves, they tend to rate it much lower for originality, and that is more significant than lots of other things. So she's working on that. I can give you her details, but that sounds like it might be a fruitful avenue.
Yeah, I would love to have more. Cool, but at the same time thinking about that would mean that in the same task, they all generated the ideas that they evaluated. And I think the chance or probability of that happening is a little bit small, but it could definitely be an overlap, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, last speaker. Sergio Agnoli is a senior researcher at the Marconi Institute for Creativity. He obtained a master's degree from the University of Padua and a PhD from the University of Ferrara in Italy. His work focused on cognitive, emotional, and neural substrate of creative thinking, as well as on the role of individual differences on creative performance and creative achievement. In these fields, he published many contributions in international journals and conferences, and he established collaboration with several research groups and the university.
Thank you, Serena, for introducing me. And finally, I'm happy to be here and talking about data and not just sending email. And so today I will present you a series of studies on a phenomenon that we called irrelevance processing. Yes, these data are the results, are the outcome of a research group, of course, where there are different persons, researchers in different universities. Laura Franchini from the University of Trento, our eye-tracking expert, Enrico Rubaltelli from the University of Padua, and Giovanni Corazza and Serena from the MIC and from the University of Bologna, of course. Okay, as cognitive psychologists, we are interested in idea generation. Okay. And in particular, we were interested, and we are interested in the attention mechanism related to idea generation, or better, we were interested in something a little different. We were interested in the attentional processes preceding idea generation, and how the processing by attention on information before idea generation can influence idea generation itself. So, looking at this Mumford model, we were interested in how the organization and perception information before idea generation can influence idea generation, and if there were some regularities in using attention that can influence idea generation. Okay. For exploring these research questions, we developed a research paradigm that is based on eye tracking. We were interested, we used an unusual users test. So what we did is putting at the center of the screen a common object, okay? And we said, you have to produce, to participants, you have to produce unusual uses for this target object. Then we put all around this target object some objects that are totally unrelated to the target, are irrelevant for the task. We say, you can look at this picture at the screen as long as you want. When you are ready, push the space bar, and then a blank screen appears, and then have to produce ideas. We measure the personality traits in the participants, and what emerged was intercorrelation and interaction between openness and the length of observation of the relevant objects. So, in predicting the scores of originality in the test, but also the achievements, the real achievement in the real life. So what emerged from this data was that the relationship that is well known in the literature between openness and creativity is related, could be related in some way to an attentional mechanism, in the sense that open people let enter more relevant information into the process, and this leads to more original scores and higher achievement, creative achievement score in real life. Okay, this was the first effect. So we found that regularities in the sense of personality trait are related to attentional mechanisms that can influence idea generation. We asked if our effect was related to a domain, cognitive domain effect. in the sense that we use pictures of objects. But we want to understand if also the representation in terms of words of the object can be related to personality traits, the processing of irrelevant words, in this case. Objects represented by words are related to personality and to idea generation and creative achievement in general. What emerged was, again, an interaction between the openness trait and the processing of relevant information in predicting the creative performance, but with some different results. In this study, we found that looking at irrelevant words, objects represented by words, influence the fluency of the unusual user's task. And in these other results, we found an effect not on a general achievement score, but to a domain score, the success, creative achievement in writing. So the stimuli match have a role. The representation of objects, the different representation of the object have a role in influencing different indexes and different scores of creative achievement. Okay, so we found again a sort of relation between personality, attentional mechanism, and idea generation and creative achievement. But we know that the creative process doesn't happen in a vacuum. Creative process is embedded with emotions. The creative process has a lot to do with frustration, tolerance to frustration, but also to the ability to manage the success. So what we did is producing an experimental manipulation that included emotion into the process. We were interested if some irregularities in managing emotions in terms of trait, in particular of trait emotional intelligence, can help managing the emotional part of the process and help using irrelevant information, help using the attentional mechanism related to irrelevance processing. What we did is to manipulate the emotional part using a cover story. We said to participants, okay, you have to produce unusual uses for some common object, but we have invented a new algorithm that automatically can score the creativity of your responses. So after 3 objects, you will receive a feedback from the computer. The manipulation was that to a group, we always said at the end of a block of trial, the creativity of your response is low, is low, is low, is low, is low. To other group, the creativity of your response is high, high, high. So we induce frustration and success in this 2 group of participants. What emerged was that in the frustration condition was a decrease of positive emotion and increase of negative emotion, and the contrary in the other condition. Okay, what emerged in relation to irrelevance processing? It emerged that after or during the first block, there was no differences between different levels of emotional intelligence. In black, you can see the high trait EI participants, trait emotional intelligence participants, and in gray, the low trait EI participants. So during the first block, they didn't yet receive the feedback. Okay? After the first feedback, something happened. It was what emerged is a differentiation between high trait EI and low trait EI participants in the use of irrelevant information. High trait EI participants let enter this information into the process, and this processing leads to higher originality scores. And the contrary for low trait EI participants. They narrow their attention and all this information started to be distractors, okay? And this emerged irrespective from the positive or negative nature of the feedback. Evaluations are stressors in the process, irrespective of the positive or negative nature of this evaluation. Okay, so we again found a consistency of the relation between irrelevance processing and personality. What we wanted to understand if this was a stable phenomenon during development. So we studied this effect from primary school pupils to adult schools, and we used different manipulations, different number of objects, because we want to know if there was an optimal level of irrelevance in the process. I go to the result, and what emerged in primary school children is a pure effect of irrelevance processing. There is no relationship with personality in influencing the scores, of the originality scores. So it was pure, the effect. The longer they looked at the irrelevant stimuli, the higher the originality scores. From lower secondary school, it emerged, this behavior gets crystallized into some stable personality traits. Openness in lower secondary school, agreeableness, that is the most social trait during adolescence, that makes sense. And again, in adulthood, we replicate the data with openness. What emerged from this data is that there is an optimal level of irrelevant information. 12 stimuli are too much. Okay, to end with, just to wrap up some fundamental points. The first is that irrelevant processing seems to be a stable exploratory mechanism that can explain in some way the relation between personality, attention, and creative performance and achievement. We found regularities, we found an effect of this processing during the emotional process, and we found that this processing has some developmental trajectories. At the beginning, at the young age, it is a normal behavior, and then get crystallized in some stable personality trait.
Thank you, Sergio. Okay, any questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you for your presentation, really interesting. It was related with your, the manipulation of the frustration and the success. A little bit related to a previous comment. Because so the participants received, every time they measured, your creativity is low, or high.
Yeah.
And that was random, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah. But I can also imagine if, for example, you get every time your creativity is high, that I think, okay, but I just generated something that is like really common. How can you be creative? And then they almost think like, okay, this can't be serious. How do you control for that effect? Or do they think, I'm not going to put in any effort anymore?
Yeah. Oh, so in different way. The first, we have a manipulation check. We ask at the end of the experiment, what are we studying? If they say that you are studying the functioning of this new algorithm, it's okay. It was a first check. Then we ask again, did you understand how we give you the feedback? If someone, and it was only 2 cases, says that it was fake feedback, we discarded this from the analysis. The other was we use PANAS and other self-rated questionnaires to assess the emotional part, and we can quite consistently see an effect, the individual effect of the decrease of emotion or the increase of negative emotion or increase of positive emotion in the two conditions. So it was quite easy to understand if one is not in the task.
Other questions?
So I was wondering how you interpret the effect of attention. Is it that people looking at the irrelevant distractors could they not help looking there, or were they potentially even actively looking for inspiration on? So is it more leaky attention, or is it strategic processing maybe?
Yes, I think that this is the question, because we didn't make an analysis of the responses in relation to the type of a relevant stimuli. So what we can understand from this data is that there is what Beatty and Farnham say, there is open people have less effective filters, and it is so they can let enter more information into the process. We don't know if they use this information, if they get inspired really from this information. Probably yes, looking at creative achievement scores. So during the life, this can help you to get inspired and having higher creative achievement scores.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I was wondering if you had looked at whether there's a drop in productivity at the times where they move the areas of interest out of the center. That is, of course, more the case for the high open to experience individuals. So is there actually a decline in productivity at the same time as there is an increase in originality for the high performing, high openness to experience individuals?
Okay. We didn't look at this kind of data in reality, but
the reason I'm asking is because we're doing experiments where we can see a drop at the time where we inspire people. So it's a temporary drop. So I was just wondering if you
have to,
if they
can answer to the question.
Yeah, we can go look afterwards. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I think.
It's not a provocative one.
Yeah.
So. So the computer interface is like that one that we see there, yeah, and there is a stimulus in the middle,
yes,
yeah, and there are these things around,
yeah,
and I, for instance, need to check which one of those. Most of them are distractors, and one is correct, something like that. How is it?
No. There is not a correct or a distracting one.
I just pick, the one that I think that, the stimulus could be used as, something like that, no?
Only the target stimuli.
The target say, the hunger was in the middle, yeah? So I would be asked to, sorry about that, but I don't understand, okay. So I would be asked, what would the hunger be used as something else?
Yes,
no?
unusually uses for a hunger.
How?
Unusually uses for the central object.
So what do I do? Well, I click on icons.
No, you click on a space bar and then a blank screen appears. And then you have to produce a unusual user. Writing.
Okay, I design, yeah?
No, write, just in verbal way.
Write verbal,
yeah.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so, thanks to all speakers, and we can move to the last session.